The origins of the United States Navy is a murky bit of history that begins with the dismantling of the Continental Navy at the end of the American Revolution, but continues through in debates when the U.S. Constitution was being written over whether to include the establishment of a standing Navy as part of the new federal government. In the end, it was an exterior threat that finally drove Congress and the nation to agree to create a standing Navy. But even then, the nation remained strongly divided on the issue. On one hand, it was an argument over the cost of establishing such a force, but on the other hand, it was also a philosophical principle associated with avoiding the creation of a standing military that could become a form of tyranny, either in the form of public debt associated with the cost of maintaining it, or in its ability to become a political force in its own right, as Americans had just discovered in freeing themselves from British colonial rule. Following the British defeat at Yorktown in the fall of 1781, Congress began dismantling the Continental Navy. Over the course of the long American Revolution, dozens of vessels had been either built, bought, or converted from merchant ships to help serve in the fight. But by the end of 1783, as the war was winding down, very few remained, and even those that did were considered unnecessary. The Frigate Alliance, the last ship in the Continental Navy, rotted away at the dock for more than 2 years before Congress finally authorized its sale in August of 1785. After sailing as a merchant vessel to Europe and China, Alliance was sold again in 1790 and abandoned near Philadelphia, where her ruins remained visible for nearly a century. It was a pretty inauspicious ending to America's first Navy, and there had been some suggestion in Congress that Alliance should have been preserved and maintained, if only as a point of national pride, an argument that would certainly echo a century later with USS Constitution. However, at the time, there was little perceived need for a standing Navy and even less interest in paying the cost of one. When the Constitutional Convention met in 1787, the cost and value of establishing a navy again became part of the debate. The Federalists argued that the nation needed a navy for self-defense, or it would be reliant on the good graces of other countries for its defense. The U.S. had alliances with about 5 naval powers capable of damaging U.S. commerce, invading the nation from across the Atlantic, or both. The Anti-Federalists argued that America's location across the Atlantic was its own defense, and that there was no threat posed by the naval powers in Europe capable of mounting such a conflict. Pirates in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean did pose a threat to U.S. commerce, but not the nation, and could be controlled with the use of privateers, they argued. Writing in the Federalist Papers, however, Alexander Hamilton saw another value for a navy. While a fledgling American naval force wasn't going to compete with established naval powers like those of Britain or France, it could tip the balance among those powers in a conflict in nearby places like the West Indies. The Anti-Federalists, however, saw this as a source of provocation that could bring more danger than security to the nation's shores. Additionally, some argued that manning a navy would deprive the nation of farmers and other occupations that were needed to exploit the resources in America's western hinterlands. In the end, while the founders did not immediately establish a navy, they preserved the ability to create and fund one by establishing a Department of War that included responsibility for naval forces. In the Mediterranean, in the meantime, the 1784 treaty with Morocco was providing some relief to American merchant ships, but conflicts with other North African states were continuing. Portugal had been containing the Algerine forces in the Mediterranean, but in 1793, in a treaty brokered by Britain, Portugal made peace with Algiers. Immediately, the pirates broke out of the Mediterranean into the open Atlantic and began raiding American ships. The dramatic move pushed America to action. Previously willing to pay tribute, Americans were now able to reconsider establishing a navy to fight the pirates instead. But the expense of a navy was still strongly rejected, not only for the tangible cost of it, but for the philosophical belief that the establishment of any government expense constituted a form of tyranny on the public in the form of public debt. At the same time, a diplomatic argument swirled around the idea that Britain may have negotiated the peace with Algiers in order to maliciously provoke attacks on American shipping? If so, would a military response to Algiers encourage a renewed conflict with Britain? After a protracted debate and by a slim vote, Congress approved the Naval Act of 1794. In the end, the vote to authorize construction of 6 frigates was aided in its passage by a provision that said construction could be suspended if peace was made with Algiers. While the rural regions of the country still opposed the development of a navy on principle, the coastal centers of commerce recognized the benefit of protection that would reduce the cost of seizures as well as the skyrocketing rates of marine insurance. When a peace was negotiated with Algiers in March of 1796, Congress again returned to the debate over funding and maintaining the ships. Despite efforts to cancel all or most of the ships still under construction, Congress eventually voted to suspend construction of only 3 of them, leaving Constitution, United States, and Constellation to be completed. It would turn out to be a fortuitous decision because within 2 years, the nation would again need a navy for its first international conflict. The fierce debates over establishing a standing navy that occurred at the end of the American Revolution in the Constitutional Congress and as part of the Naval Armament Act of 1794 demonstrated the deep division Americans had over the principles of funding and maintaining a standing military. While the new nation had to defend itself from exterior threats, the cost of maintaining a permanent standing military, and especially a navy with its expensive ships, was not a popular approach. On top of it, many Americans remained leery on principle of the idea of a standing military that could become its own tyrannical force, as many of them felt the British military forces had become in the latter days of the colonies.